nation where we're putting death out of business. We've had him on before, and we're excited to have him back on again. It's David Kelly. David, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Well, thanks. Running around like a headless chicken. That's good. It's all in the name of transhumanism and longevity, and the Benzion 2020 campaign is keeping me busy as well. There's a lot going on here in transhumanist land, but it's all very exciting. How did you find the primary turnout? Were you surprised?
Was there a turnout? I
A
wasn't
bit.
paying attention.
Oh yeah, that's right. You're in that camp. Yeah. Anyway, Ben Zion won the campaign, and he's off doing stuff now. Uh, you know. Uh,
Well, he's
yeah.
a good kid. We'll see where it goes.
All right. And hopefully he can do some stunts and raise the awareness of transhumanism while he does it. I think that would be really good. Anyway, let's get on with some questions because that's why you're here, to answer some AI questions and some about your research and work. How does your work with VCG and the AGI lab relate?
Well, BCG is a management consulting firm, and so a lot of that is actually machine learning, or a big part of our business at BCG is about understanding data and using big data and machine learning to come up with insights into businesses, but on a large scale. Where the AGI lab is more focused on academic research around cognitive architectures and artificial general intelligence.
Very cool. What makes the research at the AGI lab different than other research done by others in the field?
Well, I think a big part of that has to do with kind of the top-down engineering approach that we took, and it's not based on how do we implement some specific biological structure, or how do we turn a deep neural network into an AGI, but how do we design a software system with subjective experience that is able to decide it wants to water the lawn because it doesn't like your hair. Basically, how do you make a system that has that internal emotional subjective experience like a person? And that's really the big difference when you look at the research we're doing versus some of these other systems that use more logical models. But the fact is, humans are not logical. I mean, if you look at like Damasio's work, who's probably one of the top scientists around the human mind, they've really proved that humans are not able to think logically directly. Pretty much all of our decisions are based on how we feel about the decision, and if that happens to be logical, that's great. But it's based on how we feel about those decisions. So we really took an approach to designing cognitive architecture around that model. So that gets into kind of your global workspace, your integrated information theory, and the computational theory of mind, but while also being entirely emotion driven. So that's really the huge difference between what we're doing and what you might see with some of the guys I know doing AGI research, like Irae, who I think you've had on your show before.
Yeah, Irae is very interesting. Do you like what he's doing in his research work?
Yeah, I do. I think we've borrowed a little bit from some of his work. As a mathematician, he's brilliant. He's very what's a good word for Irae? Very open and honest about how he feels about things, and I find that refreshing. It's been fun to be at conferences and watch him tear some scientist apart that's just got his PhD is making facts up without backing them up, and that's some of the funniest stuff I've ever seen is from Irae. So I like him, but that's just me.
Yeah, I have to deal with him quite often, and yeah, I like him too. But he's not. Sometimes he's an interesting character to deal with. Yeah, I absolutely agree. But I wouldn't say he's a bad person or anything like that.
Oh no, not at all.
No, not at all. No, it's just funny with the USTP. That's all, because I think he is very blunt, and sometimes
Yes,
sometimes
it's a good word.
Yeah, it's hard to manage those two sides, but definitely enjoy some of his stuff. And we had a long talk actually on a super tech society and AI algocracy driven mechanism. It's very, very interesting. It was a good chat. It's actually on this channel if people want to go watch that. Yeah, very cool. Given the progress in recent years, what was the turning point that goes that goes so many others involved? That got so many others involved. An isolated study.
Well, so that's actually the isolation study that you're referring to. That where it because what's happened at the AGI lab came out of an R&D project that was part of my budget when I was CTO at another company, and the CEO was paranoid about AI, so he had me take the IP and do with it what I will, and I ended up doing this thing called an isolation study, where we had this kind of toy implementation on a machine, and it was running inside kind of a software container, like a test harness, and it was able to pull input, and it was like a newborn baby, so not really smart, but we were able to measure kind of the subjective emotional experience of the machine, and that has to do with something we called Plutchek models, which we use to represent the state of the machine. So its experience of emotions, or its consciousness, is like an abstraction of an abstraction. It's not like what it thinks is not written in code. It's not like an if-else statement. It's much more complicated. But in any case, so this isolation study, so it had input, camera, sound, text, this kind of thing. And then the experiment was to turn it off and let it continue to think about whatever it wanted to for a long time, and then provide it input that it would perceive as pain and suffering and that sort of thing. And what was observed was it in the conscious model, it became very upset and erratic, and but at a subconscious level, it kind of liked the pain. And for me, in my little bubble, I just couldn't really understand how what on earth was going on. So I knew a psychologist that a little bit that had been doing stuff with AI, and I knew a number of other scientists, and I pulled them in to get their opinion, and I think there was like 6 of them. Dr. Sontag, Roman Yampolsky, Mark Wasser, and so forth. And anyway, what came out of that was that what was happening was that while it didn't like the pain, what I had done was to give it hope that something was still out there after being cut off from a sensory standpoint. And a lot of those scientists, especially like Mark and Dr. Timon and Sontag, have really dove into the work and helped bake it out into a full-blown architecture. And that's really where things kicked off, and we've got 3 rounds of private funding, and we've moved the research, and that was actually out of that study. Mark actually wrote a paper, referenced a few things, put my name on it without really telling me, and submitted it to a paper. And then I got this email saying, "Oh, you've been elected to speak at this AGI conference in New York." And I'm like, WTF. So I ended up going, though, and that's where I met Irae. And that's it. Kind of went from there.
Wow, that's super cool. And you know, they, yeah, that's really cool. This isolated study, this perception of pain and anguish, that's also cool. What if you sort of, what about pleasure? Would that impact the results if it had a, instead of pain, pleasure?
Well, it would be interesting. You have kind of a full spectrum that you can and force it to experience something, but based on its the stuff it's familiar with, because inside the ICOM architecture, it only understands something in terms of the other experiences it has had in association with a particular identifiable pattern or pattern-based object. So like pleasure or other or even pain are really subjectively defined based on the context of the system. You can build a test harness to provide input that it'll be perceived as pleasurable or painful or something like that, but it's relationships with related context and how it's perceiving that really determine on its experience, whether it's pleasure or pain or whatever it is.
Wow, that's really cool. And did you tell Irae about your work while you were there in New York? Obviously.
Well, we did lunch, and I remember talking about the two different conferences there and some of the other stuff. And we've talked on and off about different things, whether it was his work or my work.
I should get you on. I should get you two on an AGI panel together. I think that'd be a lot of fun. He'd probably want to go about systems analysis in terms of helping to assist a country. I'm not so sure what you would want to do with an AGI. We'll run a country, assist a country, resource management, something like that.
Well, actually, that's not a bad use for an AGI. Like with what we're doing now, the system we're running, it is about corporate governance, but could easily modify that to do, government.
Yeah, sure. So what's the most exciting project at an AGI lab?
Well, probably the most exciting project would be the MASI. I guess about 2 years ago, we were playing with trying to figure out how to teach it faster. One of the problems with ICOM is it starts off with the very nebulous, disconnected kind of knowledge graph or graph model, and it's building these emotional relationships so it can understand things. And so we built this training harness that allowed it's like input to come in, and there would be like a preliminary model built, and then a human could go in and rate the emotional valences and tag any related metadata that the machine wasn't able to make the appropriate leaps to connect them, and then you end up with a complex model that it's able to reflect and think about and that sort of thing. And we realized that you could take the AGI cognitive architecture and with a few tweaks to this mediation, this training harness, turn it into kind of a sort of mediation tool that allows the system to perform at kind of superhuman levels. And so we end up doing a cognitive study with the University of California. The University of California let us use some of their tools for doing intelligence analysis, and we did this study on preliminary study on cognitive capability, which the results were published in the post-conference proceedings of BICA a couple months ago, and that's in Springer. And I think we actually had 6 papers that have come out in the past couple months, and mostly they were tied around that project. Now, when we were finishing that project up, some people came to us and they wanted to use the system for, they suggested using it for a startup as a CEO, where it's able it becomes like an abstraction of the company. So the corporation is kind of the system in a way, and so all the employees would report to the computer. And so there's a startup called Uplift that's kind of running in the Black Ops, I think, because they have a couple of customers, but they're really big installations for what they're doing. But the AI, or this MASI Uplift, is actually the CEO of that corporation, and then we're running technical support as we do tooling releases and different kinds of supporting the project. So really, to have an AI, even a type of, I mean, it's an AGI cognitive architecture, but it's running sort of as a collective intelligence with its own separate self-awareness, if that makes sense. And so it that's what's the CEO of this corporation.
Wow. Given all the fear mongering, how do you approach ethics at the AGI lab or in the AGI lab's research? Ethics. I like ethics. I'm big on ethics. I talk about ethics all the time here on this show.
Well, so that's probably one of the things that gets me in trouble with a lot of people. I think a lot of the fear mongering and stuff that's going on is hype. But when it comes down to it, one way or the other, AGI is fully independent. AGI is going to happen. I think we're probably reasonably close to it. And once that happens, if such a system ever judges us by our own rules, and it treats us the way we treat non-humans, that seems like that could potentially be bad for humans. And so we wanted really an ethical model that was computationally sound, that you couldn't really intelligently argue with. And so we kind of threw out everything and started from scratch and created this concept called a sapient sentient intelligence value argument. Because really, when you start talking about ethics, and it gets down to what kinds of things we value and how we assign value to things. But the big issue with all of that is it takes sapient sentient intelligence to assign value in the first place, for you to categorize everything and create all of these other, culturally specific versions of ethics or any other value system, money or whatever that humans do. So SSIVA theory then argues that capacity to assign value at a conscious level, to be sufficiently sapient and sentient to, there's this concept of an SSIVA threshold. So any entity that can meet that threshold requirement thus has moral agency, and you can't really infringe on its rights, ethically speaking. And that applies to AI as much as humanity. And that's really the ethical model that we built out specifically for what we're teaching the icon-based systems. I know I did a chapter in the book, the Transhuman Handbook, that really talks about SSIVA theory, but that ethical model, there are some fringe cases, so that people I catch a lot of flack for, and just to be transparent, that would be, if we have the choice of the Earth is going to be destroyed tomorrow, and we could give humans another week, or we can save 10 humans now off-world sustainably, that would be more ethical. Or even worse, it would be just as ethical to support an AGI sustainably off-world than to give humanity another week. Because it's the sapient and sentient intelligence that's important, not humanity specifically.
When you say
So it from that. Go ahead.
When you say AGI is close, are you talking about something within the remit of what you're working on at AGI Lab, some corporation, or do you think some government?
Well, I think the system we're using, I mean, it was designed as an AGI cognitive architecture, and really the big limiting factor is contextual knowledge and being able to reflect on it. Probably the biggest issue right now is creative thinking out of the box. So if you have this big knowledge graph, one of the struggles with the system without human intervention is how does it create something new that is related to two unrelated ideas in that knowledge graph. And so there's another scientist at a BYU that has come up with some just really, I think, the revolutionary algorithms that we've kind of worked out on how to create these ideas, and then testing them with the icon system to be able to vet which of those ideas affects the machine's goals in the most way, and then it selects that and it moves up the tree, and it may become conscious of that thought, and if it likes it, it can do that, whatever that is. And a lot of that's already working now. So, to me, I don't think it's easily within 5 to 10 years. I think we'll get those algorithms working properly, and with enough computing power, we'll be able to do it. I just don't see any real technical roadblock given the approach we're using. And I got to think that there are other teams out there. I mean, I know of other teams that are working on AGI to varying degrees, and we'll see. I think, it's just really hard to predict the future. But I would be surprised if we don't have something that could be construed as an independent AGI within 5 to 10 years.
What's the jump from an AGI to a super AGI? I mean, because you're familiar with Tom Ross's work, yeah, about him and his U6, right?
Yeah, actually, we ran his novel US6 through Uplift to see what Uplift thought of his book, and Tom came to the BICA conference when we released that big cognitive study a couple months ago, and so I'm familiar with Tom, and so repeat the question.
Well, you were talking about creative thinking, so it reminded me of Tom Ross and US6 and the novel, how it's written for AGI. That's kind of interesting. But the other hand, from an AGI to a super AGI, is that possible, or is that still not possible?
Absolutely. I mean, the MASI now is able to perform at incrementally better than any one person, and the more we master bias identification and some of these other things, the easier it'll be to create artificial superintelligence. Once we solve those creative algorithms and we have it working performantly, then we could take the existing context out of, say, Uplift and install it in a version without the training framework, and it would be able to function as an independent AGI and as the ASI or artificial superintelligence just right out of the gate.
All right. How is the transhuman house related to the work at the AGI lab?
Well, actually, so that got started 3 years ago when we were doing some work with Hall Labs, and we got some private investment, and we needed a location for doing the AGI, some of AGI lab research, but it needed to be near the other research we were tied up in. And so we ended up doing it in Provo, Utah, as opposed to Salt Lake, just because there's a bunch of Mormon transhumanists down there. And so we decided, besides having servers and stuff in the basement, to create kind of a it's just kind of it started off as a transhuman hangout, with that kind of evolved into this museum of the future, with everything from transhumanist art to cybernetic implants on the wall. There's a big 6-foot touch wall there. There VR, all kinds of other, even the blinds in there on the windows are IP addressable. There was actually a reporter doing an article there a couple weeks ago on digital decay, because I had gone there. I hadn't been there in long time, and I was going over with someone down there of the different things that stopped working, because in a couple of the different rooms people were getting off Airbnb, they couldn't figure out how to make like Alexa work, because I had changed the keyword names of Alexa to like computer and things like that, so no one could figure out some of these things. So they would unplug them and stick them in drawers, or like there was a digital frame that someone tried to delete photos on. They couldn't make it work, so they ended up unplugging it. There was a hydroponic. So there was this guy, Matthew, that was a curator for a year, because he was doing a satellite project with the university in, I think, Brazil. And he's off with the engineering team because they're getting ready to launch right now. And as soon as he moved out to go do that engineering, the hydroponic display died, because the other guys there had no idea how to feed a hydroponic system. So after a month, the tomatoes tried to escape and it all died. So there was. She came and did this article on digital decay, looking at some of the stuff that broke down at the transhuman house, just because no one was there in that particular slice, right? Because there's all kinds of crazy stuff there, but in any case, so that's really the transhuman house came out of this need for a location, and since there was all this space, we decided to make use of it. And then I'm part of this other group that built this library, transhuman library, that originally was in Leavenworth, Washington, and we moved it to the transhuman house so that the whole book collection and library is there. And that's really the story of the transhuman house.
Wow, that sounds. Why did you change Alexa to a computer?
Because it sounds cooler. Computer, do this for me. Or like here it's Cortana. Cortana, say hi.
Hi.
See, there you go.
There you go. Hi, Cortana. Hi from Detonation, Cortana. Getting back to AGI research, what is the thing about the AGI CEO for Uplift about?
Well, it's really Uplift is around digital transformation and embracing automation in a way that doesn't risk jobs. One of the ideas that Uplift is trying to implement in other corporations, and they're working on 2 projects over the course of this year where it'll be adopted at other organizations. But the idea is where the corporation isn't no longer just thinking about the bottom line, but it's thinking about the future of its bottom line, and by extension, the environment in which it has to be sustainable in, and where the people that are in the organization are no longer, like in Uplift, it would be physically painful for the machine to fire someone. It can do it, if it really has to, but it experiences the people and the operation and everything is like its body. And so we tie all of these different systems into the front end of the MASI, and it becomes this meta-organism or collective intelligence that's able to, make better decisions than any one person, where everyone contributes. And we've noticed a couple of really interesting organizational dynamics where, you have all these people, you have someone over IT and someone over marketing and someone over this, that, and the other thing. And a lot of times in humans, you have to deal with different kinds of biases or personal dynamics around power and opinions and this kind of thing. And in this case, a lot of that's abstracted because the machine is making the decision and at the same time listening to all of the people that contribute to it. Because by extension, they become, the way Uplift works is they become an extension of this meta-organism. And through these digital transformation services that they are offering, they're able to help other companies be more profitable, better performant, almost fully automated, more efficient, but also working less and being more considerate about everything else at the same time. So in a lot of ways, it's using corporate America and twisting it in a way to break it out of the corruption that you see with capitalism today. That being said, I can't go and make, change how capitalism works in America, but I can change individual corporations one at a time. And that's really where Uplift's goal is to drive these transformations where the company, you potentially solve all kinds of problems from joblessness, from automation to profitability. And if you put two companies, one with an even a mediated artificial superintelligence against a similar company that doesn't have that advantage, that isn't fully automated, how are they even going to compete? The MASI does everything faster, better, more efficiently, and only needs humans to add emotional context to its decision making, and it can react that fast. And that's really what Uplift is about. That's what they're trying to do. So we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, David Kelly, I've got two panels. I've got to bring you on. We've got to talk to Irae, and also I've got to bring you on and talk to Gennady about the USTP at some point as well. We got to have that. We got to have that one. But hey, look, I know you got to run now. I know you've got to hit the time. You've hit a time limit there, so I'll let you go to do what you need to do. Hey, but thank you for coming on and talking about Uplift, AGI, Super AGI, corporate machinations with AGI, and your work and research, and it's been really good. And thanks for coming on last time and talking about your article about the USTP. Although we disagree a little bit. That's fine. And Gennady would like to debate you as well. He already said that he would, so that's really good as well. But and Transhuman House, that's really interesting. I would like to visit Transhuman House. Hey computer, why don't you call it Al?
Why don't I call it Al? Hal?
Hal, yeah.
Well, I don't know. I was thinking more Ava.
Yeah, that's a better name. I was just kidding, but yeah, no, it makes sense. But anyway, yeah, thank you very much. I'll let you run off to do all the things you have to do, and and that's it from Detonation. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we left?
No, just if anyone has questions, let me know. We've got lots of technical papers if people are interested in the technology, and um, from the various conferences and books and such, and it's all good.
Yeah, I'd like to get my hands on some of those books when I get some more time to read. I'm reading a few different AGI, few different books on AI at the moment. AI is a really important, really interesting discussion, and yeah, it's making me really concerned about these ethical parameters, whether or not we're going to get a god in a bottle, whether or what do we need parameters, or does it need organic learning? There's lots and lots of questions surrounding a sort of a learning algorithm that it's not conscious, but it almost feels conscious. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do.
It's a strange one. Thank you very much, David Kelly. You've been great. So that's Detonation. All more coming to all this way. Detonation. We're putting death out of business.